Hello, everyone. I'm going to talk about the postmodern Psyque. And actually, I had to read two texts, but I chose to discuss only one of them, and because it was better for me to understand its concepts and to relate it with the postmodernism. So, I'm going to talk about the introduction of a book called A Thousand Plateaus, written by Gilles Deleuze and Felix Picard. And my objective here is to discuss how the features discussed in this text, the features about the Rhizome, is related to the postmodern Psyche. And I'm going to begin the presentation with three questions that actually I'll try to discuss them and to answer them throughout this video seminar, but actually you guys can feel free to discuss them as well. So the first one is, how is the Rhizome related to postmodernism? The second one is, what are the aspects discussed in Deleuze and Guattari's text that criticize the dominant side to the one that is related to postmodernism? And three, why using the Rhizome's metaphor? Thus, to discuss about the Rhizome in relation to postmodernism and to the postmodern Psyche, we have to discuss what is postmodernism. And actually, postmodernism is a term. It's something that is related with many areas, such as visual arts, architecture, and literature, and so on. And according to the professor Paul H. Fry, specifically in the visual arts, the postmodernism means the eclectic orientation to the past. In a certain way, is the return to the past. It's an opening up of textual possibility to traditions and historical moments of expressions, which modernism had tended to suppose obsolete and to have set aside. And more specifically in philosophy, the professor says that the postmodernism can be understood as a doubt, in particular about the relationship between or among parts and wholes. So actually, in these two definitions, we're going to attend in two main aspects. The first one is when the professor says that the postmodernism is a return to past and it's an opening up of textual possibilities and textual possibility to traditions and historical moments of expression. And that the postmodernism main doubt is about parts and wholes. So discussing about parts and wholes and these opening up of textual possibility, we have the discussion of the Rhizome. So what is the Rhizome? And Deleuze and Guattari say that the Rhizome connects any point to any point. And its traits are not necessarily linked to traits of the same nature. It brings into play very different regimes of signs and even non-sign states. So, what we understand here is that the Rhizome is something that it doesn't have a beginning in a particular origin or an end. So actually you have a lot of points that are connected, but not necessarily linked to traits of the same nature. And discussing about this, and actually studying about this, I thought how the term postmodernism itself can be considered as a Rhizome, because you have something that actually you don't have only one origin, only one definition is actually something very difficult to be defined if you consider the many areas that you can discuss it. So you can see many lines, many points that are connected to each other, but not necessarily they are the same. So this is one of the first aspects that postmodern is related to the Rhizome. But actually the discussion here is not necessarily about these specifically. We have here a representation of the rhizome in biology. So that is where the term was developed. And term in biology, rhizome. So actually a rhizome is a horizontal on the ground plant stem that is capable of producing the root systems of a new plant. So the rhizome doesn't have a unique beginning, so you can see that it's not about some static or something that has only one origin, but something that has many points and many lines that can be connected to each other, but not necessarily to one single point. And actually, it can create, so the rhizome can produce, is capable of producing systems of a new plant. So besides have many connections and many that are linked to one another, the rhizome as well has the capability of creating new plants. And here we have another representation of the rhizome that is a piano piece put in the first chapter, in the first page of the chapter rhizome. And here we can see as well how this rhizome is represented in music, how this piano piece is not exactly something unique. It's something that has only one singular and linear way of being developed. So you can see a lot of random lines, but not necessarily disconnected with each other. And you can see it in this piano piece. So moving forward, when discussing about the rhizome, the authors talk about not exactly of a metaphor, but some other ways of defining and discussing what is a rhizome. And actually they start to talk about the orchid and the west. So when the author uses this representation of the orchid and the west, the author is saying that the west is nevertheless editorialized, becoming a piece in the orchid's reproductive apparatus. So actually, when the west comes to the orchid, and the orchid needs the west as much as the west. Okay, so when discussing and bringing this representation of the rhizome, the author says that the west and the orchid, they are related in a way that the two become interlinked and form relays in a circulation of intensities. Okay, so when the authors discuss and bring the representation of the orchid and the west is to discuss how these two different beings, these two different natures can be related to one another, not in a dependent way, but in a way that is going to be developed a becoming west of the orchid and a becoming orchid of the est. So they interfere with each other, they can be related to each other, but actually they are not defined, they are not in need to be specific orchid or to this specific west. And the other aspect as well is this aspect about the map. So the author says that the rhizome is a map in a way that a map you have many and have a variety of paths, of ways to go. And actually the map is not something that is static and defined, such as a tracing. So actually the tracing is something that sometimes can be, okay. So when talking about the map, what the authors mean in relation to the Rhizome is that a map is something that has various and a variety of lines, a variety of points that they are not um, static. They are not one, and they do not follow a single and unique way of, going through something. And actually they said that is different from a tracing, because when tracing something is actually defining that thing. So when you trace something, you have something pre-ordered in your head that you must reproduce. And the map, no, the map is something that you can say when is the beginning of it, and actually what is the relation is how the map can be in many points linked to one another, but not necessarily um, dependent of one another. And here we have another relation of the rhizome. So by far, what we need to understand about the rhizome is that the rhizome is something multiple. It's not something static. And you can use this philosophically in literature and in many areas of society. And the rhizome as well is something that you don't have a beginning or an end. It's something that is a discuss about the middle. It's a discuss about actually what we have, but not necessarily what comes from a single origin. So in relation to plateau, the rhizome is made only of lines of segmentary and stratification as its dimensions. After it reach, the multiplicity undergoes metamorphosis and changes in nature. So actually, the rhizome is something that cannot be defined and controlled in a certain way. And this is actually can be dangerous, because Paul H. Fry says that the rhizome has a good and can be a bad thing, as well as how the author says that the rhizome can develop something good or something like the weed, that is something that can be bad to many other plants. And actually here, the author defines the plateau as a plateau is always in the middle, not at the beginning or the end. A rhizome is made of plateaus. So you have something that is made of a plateau that is always in the middle, not at the beginning or the end. So here the discussion is not about how to interpret or how to criticize the Western society and many areas such as psychology and biology in a way that they begin in a certain point. Actually, discussing about plateau, discussing about the rhizome, is discussing about something that there is always in the middle. And the authors say that it is not easy to see things in the middle, rather than look down on them from above, or up them from below, or from left to right, or right to left. Try it. You will see that everything changes. So in the beginning of this presentation, I presented a definition of postmodernism that is about a part and a whole. And here we see how the authors can develop this idea, saying that things can change depending on your point of view or in the position that you are. And that is related to the rhizome, as well as it is related to the postmodern psyche, or to the postmodernism. And actually here, when talking about this postmodern psyche, according to the rhizome, that is something that is in the middle, that is something that cannot be controlled itself, that can be linked to something of different natures. We have an aspect that the authors discuss, that the authors criticize, but not in opposition of the rhizome, but actually they can be two things and it can be related to one another. And this doesn't mean that the tree or the arborist theory or metaphor is something bad. So actually the tree is related here as something fixed, as something that has only, actually not only, but actually that there is a main and general principle that has a main idea, a main discussion that leads to all of the other discussions. And actually, the author says that there are no points or positions in a rhizome, such as those found in a structure, tree, or root. There are only lines. So here they start to talk about the tree. So here the authors start to discuss about the tree metaphor, relating and comparing it with the rhizome. And here they say that it is odd how the tree has dominated Western reality and all of Western thought, from botany to biology and anatomy, but also gnoseology, theology, mythology, and all of philosophy. So actually the root foundation. So when talking about the tree, the author is talking about the root foundation. The authors are talking about how this tree metaphor can be conceived as something fixed, unique, and that has a general foundation, a root foundation. And that is why they question Chomsky and Freud as generals. So they say that both of these authors, they are in this culture of the tree because they are seen as generals. So what they develop in some point, like the linguistics and the, so actually, so here, the authors discuss how Chomsky and Freud are seen as generals in relation to this idea of the tree. Because actually in the theories that they developed, they are seen as generals because now, see, Freud and Chomsky are seen as this fixed and this general and this root foundation of the tree. And actually, all of the other ideas that comes from it, they are in a sense bound to this idea, to this general. So you have the psychoanalysis and you have the linguistics really related to these ideas of Chomsky and Freud. And actually, when the authors discuss it, they say that, so actually when the authors discuss about Chomsky and Freud in relation to this tree metaphor, they say as well how this tree can be something dualistic, can be something that inroots binarism. So, which is totally different from the rhizome. To close this idea, the article says that it is a question of a model that is perpetually in construction or collapsing. So here the rhizome, let's go back to this first page. So here the rhizome is something that is always collapsing. It can be destroyed, but then it will develop again from some other link, from some other line, but not necessarily from something unique. So actually the rhizome is a question, an idea of a perpetually in construction or in collapsing. So it's something that is always in development. So it's something that is always in development. It's always developing. So, end of a process that is perpetually prolonging itself, breaking off and starting up again. So the Rhizome is something that it has no end and it has no beginning, only the middle. And this middle is composed by construction, collapsing, breaking off and starting up again. Because the rhizome, so the rhizome here is something that tutorializes this idea of a single root foundation. And here we can end this presentation. We actually more two questions. One of them is, why do the authors criticize theories such as Freud and Chomsky, and how do the Plato and the Rhizome are related to the theory of literature? So these are here. And then, if I'm going to discuss and going back to the questions that I propose myself to answer, here we have one, how is the Rhizome can be related? So how is the Rhizome related to the postmodernism? So postmodernism and the postmodern psyche, as we can see here, in relation to the Rhizome is something that actually is the beginning of a discussion focused on things that are not specific, are not linear, and are not, something unique. So actually the postmodern side within the Rhizome brings one of the many notions, that actually brings an idea of how our society is bound to a tree, to a single fixed idea of theories. And the Rhizome comes to question our vision of this whole and question our vision of these specific parts, bringing a theory, bringing a metaphor of a rising, of something multiple, of something that is not bound to territories, that is not bound to a single nature, into a single point of view, and to an only root, an only ideal.